Hi everyone and welcome to my June wrap up. So this month I read 7 books, and when I was going through my Goodreads ratings for all of the books that I read this month, I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that I had a pretty good reading month. I'd say the majority of the books I read were 4 or 5 stars, which is pretty rare for me. And there was only one book this month that I read that I didn't like, which I'll get to later in this video. But it was a pretty good reading month. I think also I DNF'd a ton of books this month, so I was really struck on what I was reading and what I chose not to read, so maybe that was why. But I'm really excited to share with you all of the books that I read this month and my thoughts on them. As I'm sure you're already aware, I actually talk a lot about the books that I'm about to mention in my reading vlogs. So if you want a really in-depth understanding of how I felt about a book, or you want to see my reading experience while I was reading that book, in my description I'm going to link all of my vlogs and the books that correspond with them if you want in greater detail of how I actually felt about that book. But without further ado, let's get started. So the first book that I finished this month was Different Seasons by Stephen King. I actually already lent this book out to someone. That's how much I really loved it. I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. This is a novella collection, and it's the second Stephen King book that I've ever read, and I really loved my reading experience. So the first novella is Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which if you're familiar with Shawshank Redemption, the movie, I'm sure you already know the story, but it's about Andy who is falsely imprisoned for a crime that he didn't actually commit. Then there's Apt Pupil, which is about this boy who lives next door to a ex-Nazi. And then The Body, which is Stand By Me, is the movie edition of it, which is about these 4 boys who go into the forest to look for the body of a dead boy their age. And then The Breathing Method is about a woman who uses the breathing method to give labor. I don't want to give too much away because I feel like these novellas are actually fun to kind of just dive into without knowing a lot about it. But I really loved all of them. My favorite novella I'd say would be Apt Pupil, and then Shawshank, The Breathing Method, and The Body. The reason why I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars instead of a 5 out of 5 is because I didn't love The Body as much as a novella. I still haven't seen the movie, but since I really like the story, I'm willing to give the movie a chance. I just for some reason didn't connect to it when I was reading it. But ultimately, I had a really positive experience with Different Seasons. And if you're looking for a new Stephen King book, either you've read a lot of his books and you want to read something new, I definitely recommend it. Or if you want to get into Stephen King but you're too afraid to read his horror novels, then I would definitely recommend Different Seasons. I really enjoyed it, and I'm planning on reading more King in the next few months. So the next book that I finished this month was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is a book that I never got to read in school, so I decided to pick it up on my own. This book is basically about this scientist named Frankenstein who creates a human being out of stolen body parts, and when this creature awakens, he finds that he thinks that his creation is hideous, and he recoils in fear. And this book really answers the questions of what does it mean to be a human and what happens when humans try to tamper with nature. And I just thought that it was so thought-provoking and such a well thought out story, and it was really interesting. I really love classics, and I'm really glad that I decided to pick this book up. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and if you're looking for a classic, I would recommend this one. It's referenced so many times in pop culture and just in various different books and movies that I just think it's an important read. It's one of those books you just have to read before you die. The next book I read, I actually listened to via audio, which is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I really love my reading experience with this book. If you haven't seen the movie for this, I'll give you a brief synopsis, but it's basically about this woman. It's a memoir, so it's about Elizabeth's life as she is living, that kind of typical life that you'd think about a woman in her 30s. She's married and lives off in the suburbs, has a really successful career, but she finds that she's not happy, and so she ends up getting a divorce, and she talks a lot about how she had to deal with that, and through her divorce she decides that she wants to go through a journey of self-exploration. So she ends up traveling to Italy, Indonesia, and India, and she talks about eating all this amazing wonderful food in Italy and studying at an ashram in India, and then studying with a medicine man in Indonesia and Bali. And it was just such a fun reading experience because I really love self-help and spirituality, so it definitely had a lot of those elements. But what I also really loved about it is that it was very travel oriented, and it just felt like an adventure that you were traveling with her as she was going on this self-exploration and journey. And she also really did a good job of telling you about the culture of where she was at and just all these experiences, and it really just felt like you were there with her. And I ended up giving this book a 5 out of 5 stars. It was probably one of my new favorite books that I've read so far this year, and I would highly recommend it if you're just looking for an escape, a getaway, or if you just want to learn a little bit more about yourself. The next book that I finished was The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson. I read this book so quickly, considering it's over 700 pages. I absolutely loved my reading experience with this book. This is the second book to the Millennium series. So the first one is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It's just a really fast, page-turning kind of thriller book, and it was just exactly what I was in the mood for. So basically, obviously this is the second book, so it takes place after the events of the first book happen. And as I said in my reading vlog, the first book wraps up pretty cleanly, and I was thinking once I finished it, how is the story going to develop and where is it going to go from here? The second book basically just took all of those elements in the first book that you thought wrapped up cleanly and just totally expanded off of them, and he just did a really good job. I think it dragged a little bit in the middle, but honestly the end was so good that I don't really care. And this book actually did not wrap up cleanly. You were left on a cliffhanger, so I'm really excited to read the third book and just see where he continues to take the story. But I ultimately gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and I cannot wait to complete the third one. The next book that I finished was also an audio, which was So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. This book basically just talks about a lot of the things that are happening in today's culture, like police brutality, systematic racism, white privilege, and she just answers questions that people are too afraid to ask, and she answers them in a really honest way. The whole point of the book is for people to learn how to have constructive conversations about race and just learning more about the things that are going on in today's society and culture. I actually really enjoyed this book because not only did I learn a lot about everything that's going on currently, but I also think the author did a really good job of adding in elements from her own life and her own experiences. So there were parts of the book where it was just purely educational, and then there were other parts of the book where it was written more like a memoir, and you were really getting to know the author and some of the things that she's been through in her life. I highly recommend this to anyone who's looking for some anti-racist literature to read. I thought the audiobook was great, and I'm really looking for more books like this. I think it's really important to just be educated on everything that's going on. So if you're looking for a book that's anti-racist and you just want to learn more, I would highly recommend this one. So the next book that I want to talk about is actually one of the books that I did for a vlog where my friend picks my TBR, and it's Mice by Gordon Reese. So this book is a book that I've never heard of. I've never seen it before. I'd be really surprised if you've seen this book before. Please let me know if you have. But basically this is a psychological thriller. It's about this mom and daughter, and the daughter is heavily bullied in school, and the mom, her husband left her. So they decide to kind of just escape from society and go out to this cottage in the woods. And when they get there, something happens, which I'm not going to say because I want it to be a surprise for you if you end up picking this book up. And they are pushed to their limits, and they have to figure out how to deal with the consequences of their actions. And the character development in this book is so interesting to see how both Shelley and her mom evolved into the people that they are. The reason why this book is called Mice is because the two main characters are seen to be timid and kind of fragile and not really sure, but when they're pushed to the limits, they really have to break out of this shell. Some of the decisions that they make, you're like turning your head like, why would you ever do something like that? But this was definitely a really light and entertaining read. I'm not really a thriller person, but I ended up really enjoying this book. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I would recommend it to anyone who wants to get into thrillers or wants a thriller that's pretty light, this book is a little bit eerie, a little bit scary, but it's also like really chill at the same time, and I actually really enjoyed my reading experience for this. So the next book is also from the video where my friend picks my TBR. She picked these books totally at random, and I had no idea what she was gonna pick for me, but this next book actually was already on my TBR, and it was a book that I had been looking at, so I was excited to read it. This was the book that I ended up not liking. Unfortunately, this book in brief is basically about these 12 people from Native American communities that are all traveling to the Big Oakland Powwow, which is this Native American festival, and all of their stories are like intertwined with each other. I didn't have a problem with the writing style. I actually feel like Tommy Orange is a pretty decent writer from what I saw in this book, which I believe is his debut novel. But the reason why I didn't like this book is because I just felt like I couldn't connect with all of the characters. There were 12 main characters, and each chapter would be about someone else, so it would just keep switching from different point of views. And I just had like a really hard time like keeping track of everyone, and I really wish that he just had talked about one or two of these people where you really, you know, dove deep into like who these people are and what they're all about. I just like wasn't connected to anyone, and unfortunately this book fell flat for me. I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars, but it's a book that I would say is, some people would connect with it, and I understand why. So I wouldn't say to not pick this book up. I would say just to read some reviews for this book and see if it interests you, and if you think it sounds interesting, then I would definitely give it a chance. So those are the books that I read in June. I'm pretty satisfied that I had a decent reading month. Having most of the books that I read be 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5 stars is pretty good for me. I'm a pretty picky reader. As I said, DNF'd so many books this month, so I just was trying really hard to focus on the books that I wanted to read instead of reading the books that I felt like I had to read. But I would love to know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, if you've heard of any of these books, or what you're planning to read this coming July. Please let me know in the comments. Again, if you want for me to go into further detail about any of the books that I just mentioned, check out my description where I list all of the vlogs where I talk about all of these books. And thank you so much for watching till the end of this video. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in my next one.